Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Search, Parts 1 and 2, which are episodes 1 and 2 of Season 3 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And this video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll is The Search. So, The Search is the two-part episode that starts out Season 3, where Sisko and the crew just met the Dominion, so they go off in search of the leaders of the Dominion, the founders, and Odo comes along and he ends up finding his people, the Changelings, but then it's revealed that the Changelings are in fact the leaders of the Dominion, the founders that they were searching for, which gave Sisko and crew like this alternate reality where they're back in the station where the Dominion tries to take over through diplomacy, and they find out that it doesn't work too well. But they end up letting Sisko and the others go because no Changeling has ever harmed another, but Odo refuses to go back to his people, saying that he has a link to the solids, that is, to the people of Deep Space Nine. So this was a pretty interesting episode. So this is like the early days of Dominion. You're still establishing the Dominion. The only episode previously to feature the Dominion was the episode, the Jem'Hadar, the Season 2 finale. And of course this was the Season 3 premiere, so this is following up on this new concept of the Dominion. They were name dropped several times throughout Season 2, but the first time they actually appeared was the finale, which we just saw the Jem'Hadar, and we saw a Vorta, or they weren't, she wasn't named as a Vorta. They didn't name the species until this episode. They named the species as the Vorta, and of course their telekinesis powers just disappeared in this episode and would never appear again, as it was seen in the finale, so they kind of retconned that. So this, I think this was a pretty interesting way to establish the Dominion as a new threat, because the whole, the way the episode begins makes it pretty clear that they're scared. I mean, in the episode of the Jem'Hadar, like the Dominion, the Jem'Hadar like destroyed a whole Bajoran colony. They destroyed a Galaxy-class starship, and they beamed through a Deep Space Nine shields to a very faraway destination. So it shows that they have really like advanced technology. Now, in the Jem'Hadar, they established the Dominion as being upset with the Federation for invading their space, going into the Gamma Quadrant, and their conditions were, we don't want you to come into the Gamma Quadrant anymore. But they kind of, again, they retconned that, and I think rightfully so, because that was kind of dumb motivation, because all they have to do is stop going in the Gamma Quadrant. Why not just stop going? But they make it clear that they're a threat to going inside the Gamma and to the Alpha Quadrant and invading. And the episode begins with Kira and the others like preparing all these different tactics to try to fight off a Dominion invasion, and they're completely unsuccessul. But then Sisko comes with the Defiant, and they go on a mission to try to find the founders to make peace. Now, the Defiant is another, of course, was first introduced in this episode. It would of course become a staple of the show, where it's a Federation warship. So Deep Space Nine now has a starship where they can go off on adventures, and it's not just any starship, it's the first Starfleet warship ever seen in Star Trek. And I know this is very controversial. When this first came out, a lot of people were against the concept of Starfleet having a warship, because they're always seen as a peaceful, a scientific organization that's mainly about exploring, not about defense or not about battles. And there's this whole ongoing like debate, especially it sparked up recently online. You see it on a lot of YouTube channels about whether or not Starfleet is a military organization or not. And that is a debate that I refuse to get involved with, because I think the whole debate's irrelevant. I think the true answer to this question is Starfleet military or are they not? the answer to this question is, well, it depends on who's writing the damn episode. I'm sorry, that's your answer. If it's like early TNG with Gene Roddenberry's in charge, no, they're not military. If it's later TNG, is later Star Trek, especially Deep Space Nine and Voyager, then hell yeah, they're military. But the way I kind of look at it is that Starfleet's primary job is exploration, but they also double as a military force, which in retrospect I think it would have made more sense if Star Trek structured it differently, where there was a military wing, but you never see a military wing of the Federation. It's always Starfleet. When they need a military wing, it's Starfleet. When there's the war, even in the original series when Federation went to war with the Klingons, it was the Enterprise, it was the Starfleet ships that fought the battle. And especially in the Dominion War, you don't see like a Marines, you see Starfleet officers on the ground. So obviously Starfleet is a military organization to some extent, even if that's not their primary function. So I think having a warship makes total and complete and utter sense. That, and especially the reason stated in this episode is because it was the Defiant was created as a response of the Borg threat, which makes all of the sense in the world, because of course everyone was afraid of the Borg. And in fact, in the Best of Both Worlds, they talked about how they were building defenses for the Borg, but they weren't. They didn't have enough time because it had only been a year since they first met the Borg. Yeah, screw the Voyager retconning, fuck that shit. But the real timeline where they met the Borg in Q-Who, they only had a year to prepare for the Borg. That wasn't enough, but it seems like this, and especially after the events of Best of Both Worlds, they really want to wreck up their defenses, because Earth almost, like the entire Federation almost got wiped out. So, god damn, it makes a lot of sense that they would create Federation warships. And I don't know about this, because the storyline, they had to say that the Defiant wasn't completely ready because the weapons or the war out made the ship not very functional, like it was too overpowered and they didn't get the ratio quite right. I mean, I don't see why they needed that. I guess they threw that in there so that they could explain away why there wasn't tons of ships like this already, warships everywhere. Well, we're still prototype and we're still ironing out the differences. Besides, most of the issues that the Defiant is described to have in this episode are never brought up again. And it's almost treated more like a normal warship. In fact, we see other Defiant class ships in situations where it doesn't really seem like they're it's that actually practical to have a Federation warship, like the Valiant. I think I already reviewed that episode, but kind of made no sense for to have a bunch of cadets training on a warship. But anyway, it's because set design. That's why. That's the sets they had available on that show. But so they kind of flim-flam on the warship thing in later seasons, because in this episode they made it clear it was just one giant gun. Especially, I remember a lot of people who weren't like me, who were actually happy about seeing a Federation warship, were blown away. I remember talking to my friends after this episode came out. Did you see that? And they're like, "Oh my god, the whole thing's just like one giant gun." It's just it's something that we hadn't really seen on Star Trek before, because usually before this time all we had a Next Generation where they had go ooh, here's a phaser, here's a couple of photon torpedoes, but this time we got the whole quantum torpedo where the whole thing just lights up and goes and it instantly destroys the ship. It's something that we've never seen before, and again, I think it makes all the goddamn sense in the world. First of all, that they created because in response to the Borg's threat, and secondly, that this is the ship that they'd send to go into the Gamma Quadrant, because they just discovered this new threat. They know nothing about them. The Dominion, they just know that their technology is extremely more advanced than theirs, in that they've destroyed a Galaxy-class starship and that they're a huge threat. So it makes all the sense in the world that they would send a warship in response. Now, this is also the episode where we get the huge reveal that Odo meets his people. And I talked about this a lot before, so I don't want to get too much into this, but this is something that was teased a lot in the first 2 seasons and I said this, I think we get too many episodes actually where it's like Odo goes to the Game Quadrant because he thinks he found the link to his people, and it just ends up being nothing, and he's like, I don't know where my people are. And Rene Auberginois, or however you pronounce his name, who plays Odo, once said that he was very much against the prospect of Odo ever meeting his people because he thought that would ruin his character. But then when they revealed to him that his people were actually going to be the head of the Dominion, the leaders of the Dominion, he thought, actually, that's awesome. That does work. And my response to that is, I think Odo needed to find his people. I think they needed to do that because they'd been having him mope around going, I don't know where I'm from. That it was already old. Even after only 2 seasons, that was an old, tired storyline. And if they kept doing that throughout the entire show's run, that would have been extremely nerve-wracking, extremely old. So I think having Odo meet his people was definitely a stroke of brilliance. Now, I do believe, I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I'm pretty sure that before I saw this episode, it was spoiled quite liberally, like freely, quite availably spoiled that Odo would be meeting his people in this episode. I think there was like a TV guide. TV Guide loves Star Trek, so they always had, every time a season was about to start, they'd have a big expose thing in their magazine all about what's happening in the coming season. I think they outright said, oh, the premiere is going to have Odo meet his people. Now, and in retrospect, I guess things were kind of different, maybe a little bit, regarding spoilers in the 90s, because I don't remember thinking that much of it. I don't remember thinking, oh, that's a spoiler. But if it was like present time and an article gave away that much, I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you spoiling so much? And in fact, looking back on it now, I do think it would have been so much better if that wasn't spoiled for me. If I was just watching the show normally, and then all of a sudden, because my reaction would be like, oh yeah, Odo thinks he's meeting his people, it's just going to be another fake out. And when we actually see them, I'm like, holy fuck, he actually meets them. But of course, I already knew that he was going to meet them, so when they were teasing it in the first part of the episode, where he's like, oh, the Amarian Nebula, I knew that would lead to him actually meeting his people. It was obvious because of the spoiler. But, at the very least, the TV Guide did not spoil that the founders were, or the changelings were the founders that they were looking for. That was a complete and total shock. And that was actually a great reveal. That was a great... I remember being completely fooled, completely shocked. I think that reveal actually worked a lot. Yeah, so anyway, let me talk... This episode also introduced Commander Eddington and Tyrul, and I've talked about this on my Season 3 review, so again, I'm not going to get too much into this again, but I didn't like the concept of Commander Eddington. I think he was repetitive. They already did the storyline with Perman in Season 1, where there's a security officer who came on board with Star, and I never really liked the whole storyline about Starfleet wanting their own security officer instead of Odo. I mean, I guess it makes sense if you think about it in the universe, but for storytelling, I think it's just kind of distracting. I just think they introduced Odo's your security chief, so have him be your security chief. Stop trying to question it. And the fact that they did it twice, they did it again, and it's kind of the through crisis in this episode is Odo wanting to quit because they had Commander Eddington come on board, and it's like, But he didn't want to quit when Brennan came on board just a few years ago, and he already knew this happened. In fact, what happened to Brennan? Shouldn't Starfleet have had a security officer even if Brennan left? Shouldn't they had someone aboard the whole time? This was never explained. Didn't make any sense. It was just a repeat. And it was kind of fake stakes for me, too, the whole thing. Like, oh, I'm going to quit. I didn't really buy that, man. It seemed like it was just a fake way for the writers to give him a crisis. To want to go into the Gamma Quadrant. So I think, honestly, this is the downside of the episode to me. I think they could have been better. And overall, Eddington going forward, I don't think was that big of an addition. In fact, he only popped up from time to time. He was never like, well, later seasons he would become a right-out villain. But for season 3 and 4, he was never or right out villain. He was just kind of just a pain in the ass. He's like an asshole character, a guy who's always like, being a hindrance in some way or another. So I don't think he was actually really that necessary. And eventually, in season 4, they made it so he was a Maquis, involved with the Maquis, which they totally made up in season 4. They definitely weren't thinking about prior to that. They just wanted him to be a thorn in the side, and finally they were like, oh, let's just make him a right-out villain. Which kind of makes sense. I actually think he works better as a straight-up villain than just your pain in the ass, but I don't think I ever liked him. And so that's why it's so ironic, because the other character they introduced in this episode is Tyrell, who only appeared in this two-parter, who was the Romulan, who was like, I'm here to keep everyone away from the cloaking device, because that's the other thing about the Defiant that really set it apart from other Starfleet ships, is it had a cloaking device. And it was established in Next Generation. The reason why Starfleet doesn't have cloaking technology, and this is something that people always bitched about before Season 7 of Next Generation. How come it doesn't make any sense? Starfleet's so advanced. Why don't they have cloaking technology like the Klingons and the Romulans? So the 7th season episode Pegasus made up the storyline that Federation had signed a treaty with the Romulans to not develop cloaking technology, and so that actually explains it. I think that was actually a very good explanation that explains why Starfleet didn't develop cloaking technology. But when we get to this episode, the producers obviously wanted the Defiant to have cloaking technology, but they were now handcuffed by that continuity. But I love that instead of being like the writers of Voyager or the writers of Discovery and just being like, yeah, continuity, who gives a fuck? No one's going to remember this. Mainly the writers of Voyager, I should say. But mainly Brennan Braga and Joe Manowski and Rick Berman. But anyway, instead of being like, continuity, let's just put a cloaking device on the Defiant, nobody gives a shit. No, these were Ronald D. Moore, this was Iron Stephen Bear. These people care about continuity, and they were like, no, we're gonna respect continuity and be like, we're gonna have to explain why the Starfleet is allowed to use a cloaking device, and they did a great job. In fact, it was an interesting storyline that it was a loan from the Romulans. In fact, this is something they follow up on the episode Visionary, which is another great episode I like, where the Romulans actually want the information in return for the cloaking device. So of course, in later seasons, they do forget about the storyline, to be fair. And the Defiant just has a cloaking device, and the Romulans have nowhere to be found. But in this episode, it was very strictly Tyrell was the only one allowed to operate the cloaking device. She's like, I'm here to keep you away from the cloaking device. You can't go anywhere near it. But then after this two-parter, she just disappears, and the Romulans no longer give a shit about keeping people away from the cloaking device, which I think is dumb. I think they should have kept this character. I know that this was Martha Hatchett, something like that, the actress who goes on to play Seska on Voyager. So I know a lot of people are like, well, you can't have her. If she was a supporting character, she stuck around as the Romulan, then she would never appear as Seska, and Seska is awesome. Okay, fair enough, but surely they could have gotten someone else just as good to play Seska, or she could have played both roles. You have actors playing two different roles all the time. You have frickin' Jeffrey Combs plays two main roles in Deep Space Nine. But anyway, and I like this character. I like mainly the concept of having a Romulan being on a main character, especially on the Defiant. So every time they go in Defiant, you have this Romulan there. And I think they could have used, this could have integrated well into the melting pot that is Deep Space Nine, because that's one of the strengths of Deep Space Nine. You have all these different characters that you wouldn't get on a normal Starfleet starship. You have a Cardassian spy, you have Quark, a Ferengi bartender, and you have all these different aliens and types. So if they, and later in season 4 they bring in Worf, so you got Klingons, you got Martok, and if you had a Romulan there the whole time, that would have really added to this dynamic nicely. So I think this is the biggest missed opportunity, because it's ironic, because they introduced 2 characters, Eddington and Tyrol, and they kept the wrong one. They should have kept Tyrol and got rid of Eddington. Just my opinion. Anyway, so The Search is a 2-part episode, as I said, and the 2 parts are kind of different, actually. The first part is the only one that really should be called The Search, because they're not really searching for anything in the second part. But in the first part, they're searching for the Founders, and it's a really suspenseful, dark tone episode. And again, as I said, it's a right follow-up to the Jem'Hadar, because it shows that they're taking the threat seriously. They're going out looking for the Dominion, and it does tie into the name drops of the Dominion in season 2, because you had the whole thing with Quark setting up a trade agreement for Tulare wine with the Karma, who apparently were a member of the Dominion. And again, this is why Deep Space Nine is awesome, and Voyager sucks at continuity, because Deep Space Nine knows to keep the continuity. It isn't just like, forget about the Karma, they're no longer ANR. No, they're going to explain who the Karma are. They're just some minor, despicable, like Ferengi-like species who are a member of the Dominion, but they basically just do what they're told, and enjoy Dominion membership that way. They have no real power or say in the Dominion. So as we get the storyline of Sisko, blackmailing Quark to go in to the Gamma Quadrant and help them make a deal. I think the whole scene where Sisko had Grand Nagus staff and it was like, oh, Grand Nagus told you to go and made Quark kiss the staff. That scene never sit right to me, because why would the Grand Nagus give Sisko his staff? I mean, that seemed like, unless he has like multiple copies of it. I mean, I suppose they could, because Ferengi are despicable, but I don't know. Is Sisko actually making this up? Did he actually just replicate his staff and be like, and come up with this ploy? And it occurs to me that Sisko could have just been like, when Quark refused to go to the Gamma Quadrant, Sisko could have just gone to his standard like blackmailing thing, which is, okay, Quark, well, let me charge you for all these expenses I'm giving you for free, and I'll charge you for this, charge you for that, and Quark would be like, but I can't pay for it. Well, better do it, because he used that blackmail several other times. But I guess the writers wanted to be a more original and not go to the same blackmail every single time. But it's still, I don't know, I just didn't buy that the Nagus would give Sisko his staff, his only staff, and just to convince Quark to go to the Gamma Quadrant. I don't know. Minor complaint, I guess, but it just seems silly to me. And it didn't seem that necessary to have Quark go to the Gamma Quadrant too, because you only got that brief scene of him and that Karma dude who's like being all despicable. I talked about how in Starship Mine they totally retconned the Karma and made them like, oh, we're about fair trade, everything has a value, where the guy in this episode is a totally despicable, trying to go around buying everything. He tries to buy Kira's earring. He's played by the same guy who plays Silic in Enterprise. By the way, he also appeared in the Next Generation episode The Mind's Eye as a Romulan. Decent actor. John Fleck, I think his name is, something like that. But anyway, I mean, it seemed like that was kind of just for that one scene. They had to have this whole thing with Sisko blackmailing Quark. Seemed like just a way to fill up time in the episode. Oh, and also the scene on the Defiant where Quark was with Odo, and Odo went to rest in his bucket and shapeshift in his bucket, and he was being a dick to Quark. I mean, I could have done without that scene too. I don't know. The whole thing, again, it has to say the Odo's whole crisis of faith in this episode, I didn't really buy. But it was a really suspenseful episode, the way that the Jem'Hadar Could they see through the cloak? Could they not? And you had them hiding, and then you had O'Brien and Dax having to abandon them on the station. And Bashir's like, we can't leave them behind, but Sisko's like, we have to. Our mission's more important. That was a great moment. That was a very suspenseful. It's very character building. Shows the kind of captain that Sisko is, because Dax is his best friend. Jadzia is his best friend, and he just left her behind to be tortured or killed or who knows what. But he had to, because his obligation to Starfleet is more important. That was an amazing moment, and it was just very suspenseful when the Jem'Hadar attacked. You couldn't tell if they could. They actually can see through the cloak, and they beam aboard, and they get the battle. That was all top-notch, good stuff. So definitely a very good episode. And then let me get into part 2, because part 2, I think, is where I have qualms with the two-parter. I think it's not as interesting as part 1. I think it's kind of a letdown in some ways. I mean, besides the fact where we get the reveal that the changelings are the founders, I think that's what makes this episode really great. Like the ending, and the whole thing with Kira and Odo on the founders' homeworld, and Odo sort of learning what it's like to be a changeling, and then being distrusting of Kira, and then you get the huge reveal that that's because they're the founders. That's why they don't like solids, and Odo elects to stay with his people. So that was all great. That's what really saves this episode for me. But the thing that I didn't like so much about it was the whole illusion storyline. This seemed kind of like a cop-out to me. Because, again, they're not searching for anything in this episode. In this episode, they, Sisko and Bashir find Dax and O'Brien are back on Deep Space Nine. And they're like, great things are happening. And you get Admiral Nechayev comes, and she's making a treaty with the Dominion. So everything seems plucky until all of a sudden turn out the treaty's not so good. Jem'Hadar just beat up O'Brien for no good reason, and Eddington's being a dick. Here we have to have Eddington being a dick and sticking up for the Jem'Hadar, and Nechayev is being really unreasonable and letting the Dominion get away with all this shit just because they want to make peace. Now, again, this gets back to what I'm saying about how Star Trek is different depending on who's writing for it. And I think because there's a lot of interpretation that see the Federation as weak, as them wanting peace too much, to a fault. And I think the writers of this episode definitely see the Federation that way, as wanting peace so badly that they're willing to fuck things up. Now, granted, this isn't actual reality. It's just a fictional reality. But I still think it pays... I don't like this portrayal of the Federation, personally, and that's not really how I see the Federation going. Although, again, as I said, you could just dismiss it as, well, it's not really the Federation, it's just the Dominion implanting this scenario. And the whole, why would they, I don't really understand why the Dominion are implanting this scenario. It seemed kind of like just a fake way to have this alternate reality. Oh, we're doing, like, you see Sisko and Bashir and O'Brien have those mind things, and they're living out this alternate reality. But if they're really implementing reality, why would they have the Jem'Hadar beat up O'Brien for no good reason? Why would they have all this shit happen? I guess they wanted to be realistic, but if the Dominion's plan was really to go over and take over the Federation through, like, this fake diplomacy, then why wouldn't they just do a better job? And maybe why did they abandon it through, like, because after when Kira and Odo shows up, the Vorta dude's like, oh, we found out that they're not resistant and they're not going to be very helpful. First of all, it seems like, I don't know, if it's just Sisko that's a problem, then don't return him. Kill him or keep him captive or whatever, and why don't you have a changeling go back and impersonate him? I don't know. The whole storyline felt really fake to me, and did feel like a cop out when it was revealed that just the whole episode we spent with all this time in Deep Space Nine, it was just fake simulation or whatever in their heads. I didn't really care for that, if I'm being perfectly honest. But I did really enjoy Garrick in this episode, even though it was the fake Garrick in the simulation. It has one of my favorite Garrick lines of the entire show, where is the best line. I absolutely love it, where they're trying to escape, and the Jem'Hadar catch them, and Garrick immediately points the phaser at Cisco and the others, and he's like, I see the plan is working. And the Jem'Hadar is like, what plan is that? And I was like, well, first I pretend to be their friends, and then I shoot you. That was amazing. That is such a great Garrick moment. Even if it's not the real Garrick, it's just a fake Garrick. It was still great. I also love like the interplay between Cisco and Garrick and how they're sort of talking around the issue, but they're really coming to the conclusion that they don't like what's going on with this Dominion Treaty and they want to do something about it. And I love the Garrick doublespeak. It's so awesome. So I mean, the in-universe reason for this would be that they can read Cisco and the others' minds, so they know how they think Garrick would behave and react, and so they created a proper simile of Garrick. But again, I think all this would have been more interesting if it was actual reality. And plus, it doesn't seem like the Dominion really need. Why do they need to run these simulations about using fake diplomacy? Why don't they just go in, use their superior force to destroy the Federation, or as they do later in the series, use the changelings to infiltrate instead of this? I don't know. What? See, it just seems. It also seems like like a cop out. It seems like episode 1 was really building for, this is just going to be the search, this huge confrontation, and instead we just get this simulation fantasy, and it just seems to fizzle out, other than of course a big reveal of Odo's people, which, as I said, was amazing. Anyway, my rating for The Search, parts 1 and 2 out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. As I said, it was a very exciting, very dark episode, and this awesome, amazing reveal of who Odo's people were, and I think this is took the show in really interesting directions. It established the Defiant, which was an amazing ship, amazing addition to Deep Space Nine, and made it more interesting. Instead of having these rickety runabouts, you have a warship that they can go out and go on missions on, and it establishes the Dominion as a threat, and it does a good job of establishing as not just as a threat, but as an interesting adversary, someone we want to see more of, we want to see our heroes go up against, and it does a great job at that. But as I said, I think part 2 with the alternate simulation reality was a bit of a cop-out. I didn't care for it at all that much, and it had elements like Commander Eddington and Quark just being there for no good reason, which I don't think serviced the episode all that well. So it's not the best episode ever, but still a really good episode. So anyway, now let me get into the poll options. Let's find out what episodes will be options for the poll to which episode I will review next. Okay, so now it's time to select which episode I will review. What are your options for the poll? Which episode I will review next. So let's start with the original series option, which is Galileo 7. So this is the cheesy episode where you got a college mascot guy dressed in the college mascot suit, throwing styrofoam balls that are painted like rocks at red shirts who die. This is a very silly episode. I just can't get over how cheesy this episode is. It did not age very well, so maybe there's some positives. I don't know. I can get into that if you select this one. But in my opinion, it was just really cheesy, over-the-top fun. Okay, so now let's get into our next generation option, which is going to be Redemption, which I just reviewed. I just did a review for that. You can check that out on my channel, so I gotta select another one. So let's go for another option, and this one is going to be Disaster. So Disaster's a pretty interesting episode. It's your typical, stereotypical disaster movie type scenario. I mentioned this a lot in other episodes that also do this disaster type scenario. This episode is okay. Like, the Enterprise encounters a space quake, and you got Counselor Troy on the bridge who is acting like an idiot who doesn't know how to do anything, and then a year later she's acting like an expert, but whatever. Anyway, let's get into the DS9 option, which is going to be Soldiers of the Empire. So this is a pretty decent episode. It's a Klingon episode where Worf and Dax go on the Klingon ship with Martok, and they see Klingons and they Klingon it up, and they Klingon. I mean, it's not the best episode in the world, but it was pretty decent. So I could review that if you want. And Voyager option is going to be Fair Trade. Now, Fair Trade, this is the episode where Janeway is looking, she's sick of getting her coffee from like slave labor, so she looks and she goes and finds Fair Trade coffee. No. Just kidding. No, the episode is, this is Neelix looking for a map, and he can't find the map, and he thinks he's useless, so he sells drugs in order to buy a map, which seems a bit extreme to me. I mean, this episode is okay especially as far as Neelix episodes goes. It's not terrible, but it's not particularly good either. It's a really middling episode in my opinion, so I can get more into that if you'd like. Cool, so now we gotta go to the Enterprise option, so we gotta go to a random number generator and it'll come up with season 1. Okay, so we'll see. Oh, gotta find out what episode it is. Okay, so I believe 26 episodes in season 1 and episode 16. So we have to go to IMDb to see what season 1 episode 16 corresponds to, and that is going to be Shuttlepod 1. This episode is boring. I don't like this episode. Some people actually like this episode. I don't understand why. I think it's just when Reed is talking about T'Pol's bum. Oh, I like T'Pol's bum. It's just, I hated this episode, to be honest. Like, I hate most of season 1 of Enterprise. I think this is the boring. It's supposed to be character building, but the characters are flat and uninteresting, so who gives a fuck? So if you want me to rip this episode apart, you can select this one. So those are your options. Be sure to vote in the poll. You will find a link to the poll, which is on Straw Poll. You'll find a link to it in the description below, so be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.